In this episode, Loren Steffy joins me to talk about the imbroglio at Texas A&M University over the purported or putative or non-hiring of Kathleen
So
McElroy.
now I'm absolutely thrilled today to have with me Loren Steffy. First of all, Loren, welcome back.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
Loren, we've had quite a bit of Leo from your alma mater and my former place of living, Bryan College Station and Texas A&M University. I wanted to maybe see if we could unpack what we know so far. So could you set the scene for those who may not or may have come back to Texas from Mars recently?
I guess the news flash is the president of Texas A&M resigned rather abruptly late last week after a controversy surrounding the hiring of the new head of the journalism program, a woman named Kathleen McElroy, who was an A&M grad, class of 81.
So Ms. McElroy was hired to, as I understood it, to reinvigorate the battalion and the journalism department at A&M. Was that fair characterization?
Yeah, I don't know how far back you want me to go, but let me just about 20 years ago, A&M pulled the plug on its journalism program, and that was largely for internal reasons. There was the department had languished for a number of years. They couldn't find a department head. It had become a big problem. And so they decided to pull the plug on it. I was head of the former Journalism Students Association at that point, and we fought very hard to keep it. We did not succeed, but Bob Gates, who was president at the time, also heard our concerns and agreed with them to some extent that A&M, he certainly agreed with the idea that A&M should have a journalism program. And so what he eliminated the major and basically eliminated the department, but they kept a minor. So they had a certificate program. You could minor in journalism, and that has bounced along for 20 years. And we've been eagerly awaiting a time when we could bring the program back. So when Catherine Banks became president, and she announced this whole path forward, and they brought in a consulting firm to make recommendations. One of those recommendations, which she supported, was recreating a journalism degree. And ultimately, I was part of a working group at A&M to help figure out how to make that happen. And journalism is now part of the Department of Communication. It's now called the Department of Communication and Journalism. And starting this fall, students can begin working on a journalism degree. And the key there was finding the right person. And that was actually tricky because A&M, having pulled the plug on its program, did not have a reputation among journalists as being a place where journalism education was valued. Last year, there was an unfortunate situation where the president tried to eliminate the print edition of the battalion rather surreptitiously, and she was not able to do that, but it certainly garnered a lot of national headlines. You have a conservative school, the president's trying to basically, as it was perceived, shut down the paper, and that wasn't actually what she was doing, but that was how it was perceived. And finding a person to lead this program, somebody who had the qualifications and the experience that we were looking for, was going to be a real challenge. And the great thing about Kathleen McElroy, again, she was class of 81. She went to A&M. It was a personal thing for her. She was very excited to be coming back to her alma mater and being able to have a chance at reviving this program. And where it went off the rails was that Kathleen is Black. During her time at the New York Times, she had done some work on studying newsrooms and race. And she was branded as a DEI proponent, and that set off all kinds of alarm bells with various constituencies at A&M. And they began apparently contacting the administration, and that led to Kathleen's job offer going from a tenured position to ultimately a one-year position where she could be fired at any time. And given that she already has a tenured position at UT, she decided that she would just stay there, which I think is unfortunate. I think it's a big loss for A&M. It's a big loss for future journalists at A&M. And I think it's not the outcome that she was looking for. And certainly those of us that have fought for so long to revive the department is not the outcome we were looking for, because it raises the question of who you're going to get to run this program now. Who wants to step into this when you're not even sure there's all these political landmines apparently that you're not even going to. I think the thing that probably galls me more than anything else about what happened is that Kathleen was never even given a chance to address these concerns. It's perfectly fine for donors or alumni or whoever to raise issues about their university. This happens all over the country all the time. But it's another thing when the university reacts, again, surreptitiously and just starts making decisions without even airing what those concerns are, having a discussion about it. I think that was a big mistake.
So there were three offers made. The first was a tenured position. That was withdrawn, and she was presented with an employment agreement for, I believe, 5 years.
Yep.
And the reason for this change was at least publicly stated so that the contract would not have to go to the Board of Trustees. Do tenured position contracts have to be approved directly by the Board of Trustees at Texas A&M?
I believe that's correct, although it's largely a formality. It is pretty standard practice for somebody, especially who's running a program. And keep in mind, she wasn't even a department head. This is part of another department. There was already a department head who was the one that's signing the initial letter. But yes, so the idea was you wouldn't have to run it past the Board of Regents. And presumably that's where some of this concern around DEI issues and stuff was being raised, although none of the regents have spoken about this, so we don't really know. But yeah, so initially it was a 5-year deal. The possibility of tenure was still there down the road. And then it was changed again to a 1-year deal at will, no guarantees of anything.
So let's go to the third offer, because immediately after that third offer was either made or made public, Ms. McElroy declined the position and chose to stay at the University of Texas. And there's some question at this point who generated the third offer, how or why it was made. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so that's where things got really interesting. So last week, the president, Catherine Banks, went to the faculty senate and she was asked about that. She was asked that very question, who made the changes? And she said, I don't know. I don't know that any changes were made. As far as we're concerned, the original offer is still on the table. I didn't change it. I didn't have anything to do with it. So shortly after that meeting, and by the way, that was greeted with a lot of skepticism by the faculty senate, and they called for a fact-finding committee to be formed and that kind of thing. But immediately after that meeting, Hart Blanton, who's the department head of the newly named Department of Communication and Journalism, he released a statement through his lawyer that said, among other things, that he believed she had misled the faculty senate, that she was in fact very involved, unusually, atypically involved, I believe was the word he used, in the hiring process. And more importantly, that changes to the job offer were made without his knowledge, although the document still bore his signature. And he said that he turned that over to A&M's legal department. And this would have been last Thursday night. This would have been, I'll have to double check the date. The 20th, the night of the 20th, July 20th. He turned this over to A&M's legal department, and Friday morning, the morning of the 21st, Banks resigned.
So were you ever able to figure out what the specific concerns or questions raised about Ms. McElroy were?
So there were a couple of things where it came up. There's a conservative website called the Texas Scorecard, which basically highlighted her DEI work at the Times, which was, of course, before she entered academia. And it painted her as this DEI proponent who was going to push this agenda on A&M students. Now, that was never discussed. It wasn't part of the job description. It wasn't anything that had come up in terms of her qualifications, but they played this up and they cast it in the sense that Governor Abbott has just signed this bill that prevents any DEI programs or offices from existing at public universities in the state of Texas. And so the idea was, I think the sort of the tone of the article, or maybe even the headline, was basically A&M can outlaw DEI programs, but universities are still going to hire people that push this agenda. And she was Exhibit A. And interestingly, again, they never talked to her directly about this. But it's an influential website among people at A&M, and that may have had something to do with it. There's another group called the Rudder Association, and they've confirmed to me that they did, in fact, reach out to somebody in the A&M administration and express their concerns, again, about her history with DEI programs and how that didn't quite fit with, as they put it, the will of the people in the state of Texas. And again, I think the issue here is not that these concerns were raised. That's fine. It's that they weren't ever really openly discussed. And certainly Dr. McElroy was never given a chance to address them. And I think that's really a shame.
Let's talk a little bit about Aggie culture, because that seems to me to be embedded and imbued throughout this. Whether you call it the A&M way, whether you call it once an Aggie, always an Aggie, I don't know what you call it, but I know it exists. And you're a part of that, obviously. And my perception as an outsider is literally once an Aggie, always an Aggie. And if you're a graduate of Texas A&M University, you carry that for the rest of your life, and you carry that brother and sisterhood with every other Aggie. And that means something to an Aggie. And I guess I wanted to ask you is that still exist? Is that still true? Or am I living a 1970s version of Texas A&M?
No, it still very much exists. I think that, look, and there's pluses and minuses to it, right? The benefit of the A&M culture, that sort of sense that Aggies are different and special. You run into Aggies all over the world, and it is a unifying bond, and that's a great thing. It is an interesting thing that a university of A&M size has been able to hold on to that culture for so long. But there are downsides to it too, which is that A&M has never been great about welcoming dissenting views. And I make this point in my Texas Monthly piece. It's, look, I am always going to be grateful to A&M for the education I received, the experiences I was able to have as a student journalist. It laid the foundations for my career. And so it frustrates me when I write something that some old Ags disagree with, and they say, "You obviously went to the wrong school." It's, no, I didn't. I went to exactly the right school, and I'm very glad that I did. And we can root for the football team just because we have different views on things doesn't mean we're not still bound by our Agginess, if you will. Yeah, look, I don't have a ring. I was never terribly thrilled to go to midnight yell practice, but I still root for the football team. It's like you can be a part of that experience. And I think my situation was probably a little different from a lot of people who went to A&M. My dad was a professor. I grew up in College Station. My dad was brought into the university under very unusual circumstances, and I give the university a lot of credit for that. He didn't have any kind of degree that was recognized by the university. He was teaching a very unique program in nautical archaeology. He was the only one in the world who could teach the class, and A&M was willing to bend its rules and bring him on board, and it worked out very well for him and for the university, and certainly for me too. And I have this sort of very long history and a lot of connections with A&M, and so maybe I view things a little differently than other people do, but I think that the culture can be very insular, and it can be almost closed-minded in its nature, which is given that A&M has changed tremendously just since I first became associated with them in the mid 70s through now. And it is in many ways a cutting edge research university, and it's at the forefront of a lot of progress and change.
So where does A&M go forward now, and specifically the journalism department or journalism function? You alluded to that a little bit earlier. Is there a way forward?
I think it's going to be very tough to have a meaningful way forward. I imagine they will try to keep the program. There's been a lot of work done to get it to this point, but it's going to be very difficult to find somebody qualified to run it, I think. I think anybody would have to have serious concerns about stepping into it given what's happened. But I think the implications actually go beyond journalism. Look, there's a lot of people at A&M that really honestly don't care whether there's a journalism program or not. But what has been exposed here is a bigger problem with regards to the university's hiring overall. And indeed, we saw an associate dean in the College of Architecture, which is completely removed from A&M or any of the stuff that's happened. And she stepped down as dean because she said, I can't be offering people jobs when, especially if you come from a diverse background, there's no guarantee you get a fair shot here. And I think that's the real concern. It's going to hurt the university when it comes to hiring overall. And keep in mind, one of the things that's happened here, this new journalism program is the department that it's in is part of a new College of Arts and Sciences that has been put together. And anytime you make those kind of big changes, there's a certain amount of, I guess you'd say, PR that goes along with it, right? They need to be publicizing the fact that they have this new college and this is what it was designed to do. And look at all the wonderful things we're doing. And now instead the headlines are all, look at how we treated this person that we tried to hire. And I just think I think there's going to be far reaching implications from those.
Isn't there a way?
There already have been, but there's going to be more.
Isn't there a way to have a conservative institution and view conservative values yet still have a respect for potential employees or potential students?
Yeah, I think there is. Look, it really comes down to the fact that in any university setting, you have to be willing to consider a whole lot of different ideas, and you may not agree with them all. Part of the college experience is figuring out what you really believe and don't believe, right? I don't think being spoon-fed what somebody wants you to believe or what some administration or a group of donors or whoever wants you to believe, and that's all you consider, I don't think that's the right answer. Yeah, I think, it can be done, and it can be done well. That's just not happening right now at A&M.
I suspect we'll be talking about this down the road, but I wanted to thank you for taking the time to visit with me. You said you've got a piece coming out. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Where we'll find it?
So we can find it on Texas Monthly's website, texasmonthly.com. And if you search on my name or Texas A&M, I'm sure it will come up.
All right, Loren, thank you very much. I look forward to continuing this conversation.
All right. Thank you.
This is Tom Fox again. Thank you so much for listening to the award-winning Hill Country Podcast. If you've enjoyed this podcast, I hope you will subscribe, rate, and review wherever great podcasts are listened to. I've got another upcoming podcast with Loren and Steffy scheduled to go over the recently concluded 88th session of the Texas Legislature. So look for that in a couple of weeks. This is Tom Fox again. Thanks so much for listening, and we look forward to visiting with you again on the Texas Hill Country Podcast, which is available on the Texas Hill Country Podcast Network.